everyone. This is Dr. Marilyn Clark from Clark Consulting Group. Thank you for joining me today at the lead seat. Clark Consulting Group is a consultancy that does everything leadership when it comes to leadership and career and corporate education and executive coaching. Today, my guest is Yolanda Stephens of IPG Consultant, and she's going to be joining us for a conversation. So Yolanda, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and IPG?
Thank you, Marilyn. I'm so excited to be here today. I've known you for a little bit, so this is really fun to be participating. This is only my second podcast I've ever done, so we'll see how it goes. IPG Consultants is really just a reflective or an extension of like my career. I am trained as an attorney, went to Loyola in Chicago and got licensed in Illinois. But shortly after my career, really always liked contracts, right? And so started with the Chicago Housing Authority negotiating labor contracts, went to United Airlines. And then kind of after I had kids, got married, I was like, I don't know that I want to do labor as much, right? Because it's just a different kind of lifestyle. And so I made the switch completely over to HR because labor relations always, certain organization is part of the HR function. And so I've spent my last 17 years of my career kind of teetering both lines of being an HR professional with a legal background. So IPG Consultants is a reflection of that. I have legal services with a focus primarily on labor, employment, really more employment at this point, reviewing severance agreements, employment contracts, helping people kind of navigate when they are wanting or an organization is wanting them to kind of exit and having people think through those strategies and how you might negotiate packages upon leaving. And I also provide that to organizations if they're needing that services, but primarily that has been individuals. And then the second piece of my business is really around coaching. I, as a senior leader or as executive in HR, have spent a lot of my career coaching leaders. And I think that's where my background as an attorney and then the HR professional really kind of blended well together because I was able to give CEOs in particular the perspective of this is what is going to happen if we do X. But then the HR side of me was also able to kind of shape whatever direction we would take. And so I would have several CEOs tell me that you're the only type of attorney I like, but you're not a real attorney. And I don't know if that's an insult or how to take it, but it kept me employed, so I kept doing it. And so with the coaching, it's allowed me to really tap into, I think, taking both of those pieces to the next level where I became really focused about individuals. And so within organizations, I just believe strongly that if you cultivate the people at all levels, you then don't need as much lawyering and probably not as many or as much involvement from HR. And so that's what I kind of build coaching around is really about really this idea of increasing individual awareness if you're in a role and understanding kind of what's your influence, what's your ability to affect the change that you value, and then helping people understand where there's a disconnect and then what do you want to do about that disconnect, right? And so I think I really firmly, if companies really invest in that, you won't have as many issues and disconnects about the culture, about social responsibility, because people are valuing some similar things or they understand why the organization doesn't value what they value. And then they can make their decision, right? So that's where the coaching is. And the culture engagement is just really reflective of all those pieces, the HR work that I've done, the D&I work that I've done, that I can bring that expertise to organizations, and particularly organizations that are starting up in terms of the HR function, who sometimes put HR last. But if you can build your values at the beginning and as you're starting out as a company, you will have, I believe, greater success in how you recruit talent and go forward. So IPG is a reflective of kind of my whole career with those three areas. I'm sorry if I went on too long.
That's fine. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. So today,
Yeah.
Yolanda, what I want to talk about, and you mentioned a little earlier, is cultural engagement. So I have some things that I thought maybe we could discuss around that. So my first thing I wanted to think about was, what are your thoughts on the roles that leaders should play in shaping and influencing culture of an organization, and how, well, you kind of shared with us how you personally contributed to that, but if there's anything else you want to add to that, that'd be great too.
Yeah, I think the first thing that is really, really critical is an organization defining what they mean when they say leader. And because it's such a term that is used, but what do you really mean? Do you mean just the people at the top, right? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but when you say leader in your organization, does it mean director and above? Or does it mean everyone? And so I would say at the last organization, that I was when I was internally, we intentionally made a shift to say leader, and it was when we were defining new core values and competencies for the organization. Leader was everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it caused discussion. Like, is that really what we mean? And I said, well, if we don't, then what do you want to call everyone else when you talk to them about the values?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And they were like, yeah, I guess you're right. It makes sense. And so we intentionally, when we were going through that exercise of rolling out, doing surveys to determine the new values of the organization or to refine them, we said we are using leader because that's everyone, because everyone becomes responsible for influencing, shaping, and leading and demonstrating the values of the organization. So I think it has to start there with understanding and being comfortable with that. And then that means you got to have real conversations around limitations of the leadership, maybe at certain levels, maybe in certain roles, right? All leader being defined may not have the same level of influence,
Mm-hmm.
right? But we all still are leaders and can shape and evolve the culture. So I think that is the first part of the discussion.
Okay. I totally agree with that. And for years, I have kind of preached that as well. I feel
Yeah,
everyone that wants to be a leader does have leadership capability. And over the years, I've seen organizations really miss talent because they weren't in the mold or the model or what they thought was a leader should be. But and me being my background also being in HR, I can definitely agree with that to say that anyone can be a leader in their own right,
right.
depending on what that level might be. I mean, they lead themselves, so
Absolutely.
and that's having their own mind, being able to hear their voice, because everyone can contribute in some way. So thank you for that. Next, I wanted to talk about some examples that maybe you think a strong, positive organization culture is. What does that look like, and how leaders can contribute to building a strong, positive culture?
Yeah, I think it's a look, but it's also a feel.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think when you have a strong culture, and again, that's going to be defined by that organization as to, what that needs to look and feel like. But I think more important, people feel good about, right? And that's overlooked, right? But people feel good. They feel proud. They are unofficial ambassadors of the work of the organization. And that is a good culture, right? Paying for having influencers that you don't have to pay, influencers that just speak about the work, the value, the impact that the organization has. And so I do focus a lot on what's the feel that you want people to have. And so I've come most recently from a culture institution, and a big part of the feel was fun, right? And so there were times based on different things going where people, it doesn't feel fun anymore. It doesn't feel, and so that's when we knew we needed to shift. We needed to think about things different. We needed to approach things. And so I think that's where transparent, open, frequent, as many channels of communications are really critical
Mm-hmm.
to having the culture that you want, for it being strong, if that's the word, because certain circumstances outside the control of an organization may influence what's going on. And so you need to then know from employees, from leaders in the organization, that it doesn't feel right. And then
Mm-hmm.
you got to take steps to shift back. So I think modes of communication are really, really critical. I think opportunity for all leaders within the organization, regardless of role, to have an impact or to have some influence. And so I've, done that through employee engagement councils and letting people plan events within an organization. They can do much better than I can. Right. And so
Right.
because they know what each other wants for it to be fun, for it to be effective, but
Mhm.
also giving them the opportunity to plan events that allow them to develop project management skills, right? Like realizing that development of leaders within your organization, it doesn't just have to come within the role. And so a good organization and a culture that understands that gives people a lot of different opportunities to get involved in shaping the organization outside of just what they were hired to do.
Okay.
And so if a culture can get that right, then your culture will probably grow as you need it to.
And thrive. Yeah. Yeah, I'm all about opportunity, but in opportunity, you have to give me accessibility. Okay.
Yeah.
So it has to be accessible to me in order for me to grow. So I think those
Yeah.
are the two very important things when it comes to culture engagement. So as a person that's been in leadership for some time, Yolanda, are there some maybe specific examples of how you address the challenge or conflict to help maintain, because change is always constant. So some things you might have done to maintain a positive culture.
Yeah, I would say, and I will credit Paul Rotatory, who was our his title changed at time, but basically our L&D manager, and he really pushed surveys and as a tool for always checking what we were doing, right? And it took some time for me to really see, and understand the value of that. But now as a coach, I live and die in surveys and assessments and getting data. And so, but Paul was already there. And so, always taking an assessment. I remember with the organization when we were opening back up over COVID, we were constantly surveying employees about, do you feel safe? What could we do better, right? I mean, that's just an example. Engagement surveys.
Mhm.
When we were going through a lot of change, we brought in a consultant that helped us assess people's change EQ,
Mm.
right? So that you would know what leaders, and at that point, leader was defined primarily as director and above. That was before the shift I talked about. And so, but we wanted to know each leader's comfortability with change. And so we brought in someone that facilitated assessing that. And then we had sessions to talk about it. So really became really grounded in measuring and then assessing and then giving tools to fill in the gaps, right?
Right.
Of whatever you measured. And so I would say that's probably not the fun part of culture, but it's the necessary part to measure it and to make it real for people that are making decisions who think it's all fluff, right? You ground it in some real data. And so that was really critical.
That's refreshing to hear, because for me, it's been times where there's a struggle with getting organizations to that point of understanding that measurement is key. The data doesn't lie, and if you look at the data and measure, that is going to be your baseline for moving forward to whatever it is that you may be trying to do. When a lot of times people like to skip that part and just say,
Absolutely.
let's just do, let's just do the training, let's just do the development. But
Yeah.
we got to measure it to see what effect it's having in an organization. So that's refreshing to hear.
Absolutely. And I think it's really as whether you're leading L&D or CHRO or whatever your role is, and people are like that, it's getting underneath why do they want to skip? And
Mhm.
the wanting to skip to know is sometimes fear of what is going to come out of it.
Very
And,
true.
what I would always say is like, if we don't get ahead of what you're afraid of, it's going to be much worse,
Right. Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
We're never going to be able, to fix it. And I think when you think about things that are going on with some growth and spurring of unions, I think that's where organizations have kind of not done themselves a service by getting underneath what people are thinking and feeling because they're afraid to know. Well, if you
Right.
don't, somebody else is going to do it.
That's true.
Right. And so I think it's getting past, that fear of not wanting to know how bad it is. But if you don't know, somebody else will, and they'll turn it against you.
Return.
And so I think that's our role as coaches, as consultants, as see it to really push people past the fear of
Right.
the information and the data.
Right, right. Because the boots on the ground, those are the ones that are out there
Yeah,
doing it every day, and they
yeah,
can give you the best picture of what actually is happening when it
yes.
comes to what's happening deep down in that organization. That's for sure.
And
I've
when
seen,
you ask people tell, they're not hesitant, they're not going to
yeah,
not tell
right.
you.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But that's what we need. That's what we like. I've
Yeah,
worked with clients along that same line, and things are moving along for them now because they
yeah,
did that, because they took that exercise. And I was like,
absolutely.
look, it's not about training here. What we need to do is we really got to, they're not being heard. They want to be heard.
Right.
And so we need to listen. And how can we go about, getting that done, listening to them and then acting upon what we hear. So
Absolutely.
yeah. Next, I wanted to kind of shift. I know you said your L&D person was the one that kind of got you on the bandwagon of measuring and doing
Hmm.
surveys. So if we look at that, we've done that. Okay, we have our statistics, our data, and so we want to start moving to a training plan to kind of reinforce what that desired culture, what it is that we want it to be. How do leaders invest in achieving that? What role can they play? Well, now that we know what we want to do when it comes to the training plan or a development plan for employees, what can leaders
Yeah, I
do?
think the key piece, and again, this to me
Mm-hmm.
becomes the critical role of the HR folks, is to
Mm-hmm.
ensure that everyone sees and understands the data, right? Because so oftentimes we get so busy and we get the information, then we go off, create a program,
Mm-hmm.
and we miss the step of bringing everybody along. And if you don't bring the whole organization along, there's not real buy-in, and people go and they roll their eyes to the
Mm-hmm.
program.
Right.
So this piece of taking the moment after you get the information, even though we as HR professionals or as consultants, we may already know what that program needs to look like. But it's really important to taking the moment to pause and bringing in the other leaders, because they may make it better. In most instances, they will, right? Because they will oftentimes give you um, the strategy. They will question how this ties to the business strategy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sometimes we may not have all the details as that as HR professionals. And so getting that partnership with the other leaders adds that credibility to the training and the program. So I think that that's really, really, critical.
Mm-hmm.
And then ensuring that the other leaders are part of, in some instances, the rollout or the selection of who's going to deliver it, or if it's going to be built in-house in building it.
Mm-hmm.
I think, again, it's about creating the buy-in, the partnership, so it doesn't become just another HR training, which are important in and of itself. We know that,
Right.
but we also need to recognize that sometimes it may not get the credibility, the prioritization that it needs. So ensuring that you have that partnership with other leaders in the organization are critically important to the success. And nothing I've in the roles that I've had hasn't ever been in isolation. It is definitely in partnership with other leaders across the institution.
Yeah. What I've experienced and what I like to see is leaders actually coming in, sometimes in even leading classes and
Yeah,
being able to set a tone that it's still a safe space. You don't have to worry about retributions, but it's a space where we all want to share and grow and learn from each other. And I just love when leaders come together and take on that persona of that, I want to help you, so help me help you. And how I'm going to do that is kind of share what I know, but then I also want to learn from you as well. And
absolutely.
employees feeling comfortable enough to do that, that really takes, I think, is to me is a true leader that's invested in developing their
Agree.
people. First, now, wanted to talk a little bit, Yolanda, about business goals and
Hmm.
strategies, and how cultural engagement kind of aligns with the bigger business goals and strategies of an organization? What are your thoughts on
Yeah, I think that starts with the CEO ensuring
that?
that culture via the CHRO or whatever the role is that leads it within the institution, D&I, if it reports up to HR or it's separate, is that the CEO ensures or sets the tone
Okay,
for the culture being a key part of the business strategy of the organization,
okay.
right? And I'm going to say without that, it becomes very difficult to be a progressive organization that probably has the type of culture that, leaders or employees want, right? And so that's just critically important. And I'm happy to say I've, worked for CEOs and leaders that have always kind of made that, crystal clear. And I think it's because when I go in and I interview, I ask that, right? Because I'm not the right person for certain roles in organization if that's not where you're at, right? Like
Mhm.
I always say to people, it'd be difficult, I'm not gonna say impossible because I don't make a lot of it'd be difficult for me to take an HR role where it reported up to a CFO
Mhm.
or another role. Not impossible because there
Right.
maybe are, but I do think sometimes the function may lose the prioritization if it
Mhm.
doesn't have a seat at the table when big decisions are being made, so that the culture, the people piece is built into the business strategy.
Okay.
Again, I don't make that as an absolute, but I do think that is a question that I do have about what the seat is at the table for the function within an organization. So I think that starts at the top, the very top.
Right. What my last topic I wanted to kind of share and talk about was, is there some other advice that you'd like to share with leaders on ways to enhance cultural engagement in an organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think defining what that means for your organization, right? I think we live in this age now of social media, of trends, even for organizations and corporations. And oftentimes we pick up things that we hear about, we're told about, that are working in a certain industry or an organization, and we just do it without taking time to really assess your current organization, how this fits in or doesn't fit in, and does it make sense for us to evolve and grow in this direction? And I think that that is can be a fatal mistake.
Mhm.
For organizations just doing what appears popular, even if
Mhm.
it is coming internally from leaders within your organization. Now you need to listen to it. You maybe need to discuss it, but then you need to figure out how does it really work for us? Does it advance our business goals? Does it, right? What is it going to, but instead of just doing it because a group within an org says it needs to be done.
Right.
And so I think that that is critically important, but that also takes conversation. It
Mhm.
goes back to communication, right? And it takes courage to say no. And then it's, the no with an explanation as to why we don't think this fits for our organization, our culture.
Mhm.
And so I think taking stock to assess and evaluate your culture on a regular basis is critical.
Okay. Okay. Um, Anything else you want to add, Yolanda, about cultural engagement? Any last thoughts about knitting all this together?
I would say it's fun work. I mean, I think that I always say that if you're doing it well, you are kind of the heart
Mhm.
of the organization, because it's the place where the feeling that people have about the organization comes to what the business and the goals and the objectives, and it can be just really fun, a tapestry of
Mhm.
work that you're able to be involved in and have influence in an organization. So for me, I always say, don't forget the fun, the impact of the work. And that isn't just based on you leading the function, but ensure that all your leaders kind of understand that because it's all interconnected, I think is what I would say.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Yolanda, for your insights today. I really appreciate you being my guest on the lead seat.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.